Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Taylor and I'm with TV Toastmasters. My home group is Feedbackers in Beaverton, Oregon. I first joined Toastmasters for a couple reasons. I was nervous. I had trouble speaking in front of others. I needed some help. And when I joined Toastmasters, not knowing what to expect, I learned several things. One, it gave me the confidence to speak in front of others. I learned how to take constructive criticism. I benefited from that. That benefit was the confidence to get a job. When I took the suggestions in the club, when I started speaking in front of a group and remained speaking through my role, doing table topics, getting topics that you're unaware, learning how to think on your feet, learning how to speak on your feet. I first started working managing the Berkshire Hathaway account. I started as a back office role, not the face of the company. It didn't take long until I was dealing directly with the executives. Today I give executive briefings for Verizon Enterprise in the highest level in the enterprise space. And I'm grateful and I owe all of that to Toastmasters. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ken Coomes from Day Writers and TV Toastmasters. Welcome to another episode of our show. Tonight I have the privilege, honor, and pleasure of introducing an author and publisher, Ben Gorman. Benjamin, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So, your first book, tell us a little bit about that.
So The Sum of Our Gods came out in 2013, and it is a religious satire. I call it gently blasphemous. And it tells the story of an insurance salesman from here in Oregon who has been cursed to have coffee with God once a week and listen to God complain about all the other gods who are causing him trouble, his wife and his son and everyone else. And so it is funny and fun and irreverent, and that's been kind of the joy of it. Yeah.
Okay. Of course, now we have things like God Friended Me on television and so on.
Right. Well, and when it came out, Neil Gaiman's American Gods came out before, but I had not read it. And people were saying, oh, you need to check this out. And I very intentionally avoided it. I was like, I cannot, I've got Thor as a character. I can't be reading a book that's very similar right now. And so I didn't read American Gods for many, many years. And then I went back to it and I was like, okay, they are very different. I'm okay. Nobody can accuse me of copying from Neil Gaiman. So.
And of course, if you avoided that, you knew you weren't copying, but you wanted to make sure other people would know.
Yeah, when I finally went back to it, I was a little worried about that. The people are going to say, these conceits are similar, but they're not at all.
But you didn't stop there. 2015, the next book came out.
2015, Corporate High School. Corporate High School is a young adult dystopia. It's set, I wrote it 99 years in the future, so now 97 years in the future, about a world where one corporation takes over the schools and kind of uses them as a vehicle to brainwash kids into being incredibly supportive of the corporate hegemony over everything.
Okay.
And so eventually there is only one corporation in the world. They teach kids that prohibitions against monopoly are terrible things, and monopoly should be the goal of every enterprise. And so they end up running everything, and it's the story of a young woman who figures out how she's going to fight back against corporate hegemony, worldwide. So it's fun for students, but it's dealing with some big stuff for teenagers.
Sounds interesting. Did you get any ideas for that from Steve Jobs and Apple?
Actually, where it came from, I was sitting at a union meeting, and somebody came into the meeting and said, have you heard that the Walmart Corporation is getting into the charter school movement, and they are starting Walmart schools? And at the time, we laughed, and we said, what would a Walmart school be like? The lowest standards every day, we were joking around about it, and then I went home, and I went, that's not really funny. It's kind of terrible. What would that be like if we had schools that were aiming for the lowest common denominator and the maximum profit at every turn? And so, as I started thinking about that, I thought this could be a really great story. How could I tell this? And then I went to a writing seminar with Eric Witchey, who's a very talented local author. And one of the points that he made is every story is in its own way a mystery. The character is trying to solve something. And that was very helpful for me in plotting that one. The character is trying to crack a code that is being used by the rebel groups to send messages. And if she can just figure out how to crack this relatively simple cipher that is complicated enough that it eludes the corporation's, data filter systems, then she can participate in this rebellion and fight back. So that's There was a class of students in Michigan who were reading it as a class, and they sent me pictures of all the students trying to crack the code themselves and figure it out. And it's a real code system. It really works. So they were able to decode the messages, which was fun to see.
I'm sure it was. Well, thank you for no spoilers telling us how that ends.
Nope.
Of course, we don't want to know that.
I won't tell you how to crack the code either. That's
Okay. I love puzzles.
Yeah.
So that was followed. So you've got very diverse kind of writing here.
Which is not a good thing from a marketing perspective. There are a lot of folks who will tell you if you want to be successful, write the same book over and over and over, because then your readers say, I'm going back to this person. I know they write this. I read this book that they wrote that I enjoyed. I'm going to go back and I know what I'm going to get. It's going to be the same thing. And so changing genres is not a good marketing decision. It's very much an artistic decision. I would be bored to tears writing the same story over and over. So mine are, very disparate genres, and that's just because a story comes to me and I say that's the project I want to be working on right now, even though it's so different from the last one.
I think that also testifies to your writing as a passion and not as a commercial drive. I just want to be rich.
Right. No.
It's not
yeah.
that.
No. Well, especially writing genre literature. Science fiction is more respected now, but it's still not. If you really want to be making money, I'd be writing textbooks. That's where the big money is. Self-help, that kind of thing, which I am not qualified to write by any stretch. But I love what I get to, these stories that I get to play with.
So following that difference in genre and approach and topic, then came the Digital Storm?
Yes, and so the Digital Storm came about when I'm a high school English teacher, and I was teaching Shakespeare's The Tempest. And one of the activities that I do is I have my students essentially write fan fiction. They rewrite a passage. One of the things I'm trying to convince them is fan fiction is not a bad thing. I'll have students who say, well, I'm not a real writer. I just write fanfic for my favorite TV show. And I have to say, fan fiction is all Shakespeare ever wrote. That's completely legitimate. So we take a passage and we retell it. And I started retelling The Tempest as a science fiction story and was just having a ball. And so I just didn't stop, and I rewrote the whole entire play as a science fiction story that takes place on a virtual island where it's within a large institutional bank's computer system. And the characters are artificial intelligence programs. Caliban the monster is a virus, that kind of thing. And so it's a lot of fun. I had to get some technical help to sound like I was more knowledgeable about those kinds of systems than I really am. But the ultimate backbone of the story is Shakespeare's plot. So that was nice to be able to rely on that, because Shakespeare knew how to write. The guy was good at what he did.
I don't think very many people would argue with that.
Yeah.
And fan fiction, we've got success stories today.
Sure.
Brian Sanderson took over when Robert Jordan died and finished his series for him, for example.
Right, and did very well. So, that it's entirely legitimate. Well, and then the 50 Shades of Grey series is just Twilight rewritten, So that is, and went off in its own way. I've never read that one, but I have read what's the series, the Olympus Percy Jackson series.
Okay.
In the Percy Jackson series, the first book, as I was reading it, I was thinking, this is just Harry Potter. You've got a male protagonist, his kind of funny sidekick best friend, his female friend who's smarter and more capable than he is. It's Hermione Granger, it's Harry Potter, it's Ron Weasley. Well, then that series takes off and does its own thing, and by the sixth book, it's wonderful. And so I think that that's helpful for students to see that it is okay to take a story and start somewhere and put a little twist on it and then go your own way, and it will become its own story.
And it helps readers to start with something they can at least recognize from what they've read before or from life, so then they get a launching point and then follow it.
They're comfortable with that, and then it goes somewhere, and they get to have that discovery. Oh, this is cool. This is going somewhere that I like.
And yet, you're encouraging people to stop reading, or sort of, because the newest book is Don't Read This Book.
Yes, today is the launch day, so it hits store shelves today. The book is titled Don't Read This Book, but the title is a reference to the book within the book. So it tells the story of a woman who is the most talented writer in the world, and she is identified by three witches, a la the three witches from Macbeth, only in the modern day, and they identify her to this villainous necromancer and say, this woman is so talented, she could write a book that could end the world. And so he chases her down and traps her and makes her write this terrifying book. And she is rescued and now must save this manuscript from falling into the wrong hands, or it will end the world. So it's a fun adventure story, but it allowed me to say, what would be the best book in the world? I'm not capable of writing that book, but I can tell the story of somebody who could. And so I get to tell the kind of fun vampires, werewolves story about the best book in the world.
Back to the passion as opposed to the seeking commercial gain only.
Right.
That leads to things like what you're coming up on with supporting Alzheimer's, and there's some research there.
Right. So my wife and I started a small publishing company, and we have really focused on figuring out ways that we can use the company to commit ourselves to some of our values, to social good. And so, for example, this last year we accepted author Kamala Shamsi's challenge to only publish women for a year. And that was wonderful for the company. It,
good for you.
Yeah, it got us kind of on the map and attracted incredible talent. These authors that saw our commitment to them and then came to us are so talented. So that was really a great thing. And so we were thinking, what are we going to do this next year? And the Alzheimer's Association, which is an organization that provides both research but also care for people who are, the family members of people who are suffering from Alzheimer's, they do an annual fundraiser on the longest day of the year, the idea being related to the idea of kind of sundowning. And so this is the longest day, and this year, June 21st, our participation is we're going to get together this group of writers, and we're going to see if we can write from dawn till dusk. And we're trying to build that group of writers into some, the largest body of writers we can, writers from all over the country, all over the world now, and see if they'll participate. And then they will fundraise via social media, that kind of thing. And if everybody contributes, we get to do this thing we love anyway. We get to write all day, and folks can then contribute, and hopefully we can raise a lot of money for folks who are suffering from Alzheimer's.
And I see the other connection there, perhaps intentional, that the longest day before sundown, the longest time people have quality of life before they get to that sundown stage of Alzheimer's or something like that.
Before the darkness is setting in. And so one of the things that I spoke today with one of the folks from the Alzheimer's Association, and she was wonderful, and we were kind of brainstorming ideas for writing prompts and that kind of thing. And I think, she was suggesting focusing on memory itself, and that certainly will be one of the options, but she had this other great idea of having writers write letters either to themselves or to loved ones about things they want to remember in the future. Write a letter in the form of a poem or whatever that identifies what are those things that you want to remember and gets you thinking about how would it feel to have a loved one who is losing memory in that way. And so I think we'll do that, but another prompt we'll encourage folks to consider is something far more general, the idea of fighting against the coming darkness. And that allows folks to, tell a fantasy story, whatever, and use Alzheimer's as an analogy. So there'll be lots of different ways people go with that, and I'm excited to see what they produce in that one,
And that will be on June
21st.
June 21st,
Friday, June 21st.
The longest day of the year this year.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break right now, and we'll join you shortly.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Harmon. I'm a member of TV Toastmasters. In this club, we have an opportunity to practice speaking before the camera as well as running the equipment room. If you're interested in being interviewed on TV Toastmasters or becoming a member, please go to Toastmasters.org and look for us, or simply search for TV Toastmasters on the web.
Welcome back. I'm here with Benjamin Gorman, author and publisher. We've been talking about his books, and we talked about some Alzheimer's support coming up on the longest day of the year. But I want to pursue something else now, too. We've already talked a little bit about the fact that you're also a teacher. So tell us about what you teach and what you get out of that and what drove you to that.
Yeah, I'm a high school English teacher. I'm very lucky in that there are a lot of writers who have to, do day jobs that they don't enjoy. And I get to have a day job that I love. I teach high school English. I teach predominantly freshmen and seniors. So teaching freshmen, makes my colleagues love me because they don't want to teach freshmen, and I really enjoy freshmen. They've got a ton of energy, and a lot of it's just kind of herding cats, but they're smart and they're fun. And then my seniors are, really sharp, and they're, headed off to these fabulous universities and that kind of thing. And I get to teach them creative writing, and then one of my favorite classes is science fiction literature. And so I'm so spoiled as a teacher to be working at a school that would allow me to teach sci-fi lit. And we really dive into, taking this genre very seriously and using it as a vehicle to understand how we can look at all stories and see the way that literature functions. So we do really deep dives into material that I think a lot of folks don't take seriously enough. But there's a lot of wonderful literature within science fiction.
Probably within most genres if we take the time to look for it.
Right.
So what's one of your favorite memories so far from those you've taught?
That's a good question. I teach To Kill a Mockingbird to ninth graders, and that's one of those books that is taught, it's ubiquitous. Ninth grade, around the country, everybody's reading To Kill a Mockingbird, but you can find a lot to work with in that book. And so we do some very heavy conversations about gender, about race, about history, what was the Great Depression like, and sometimes those are uncomfortable for some of my students, but that's where I see some of the deepest learning, when I push them to talk about things that they wouldn't naturally be inclined to talk about, especially things that their kind of inclination is to say, let's not talk about this. If we can push beyond that and say, we have to truly understand this story, we're going to have to, delve into that, then we have some of the best discussions.
I can imagine. You have fairly diverse classes then?
I do, which is one of the other things I love about the school where I teach. I teach at Central High School outside of Salem, Oregon, and our population is diverse, ethnically diverse, and the diversity is growing over the course of my career. And that's important to me. I was raised, my family we moved from Illinois to San Diego when I was in, first grade, and I was in magnet schools. And so I was an ethnic minority throughout my elementary years and back then what we called junior high instead of middle school. And then when we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, I was also always an ethnic minority, and that's far more comfortable for me. Then I went off to college, and it was predominantly white school, and I was like, I don't know how to handle all these white people everywhere. This is very strange to me. And so being at a place where the student body is diverse and is bringing all these different experiences into the room, and being able to create a place where everybody feels safe and like they all have something to contribute is one of the things that I enjoy most about my classes.
That's good to hear. And I'm sure it's rewarding for them as well as for you.
I hope so.
But it doesn't stop there. So you've published 4 books so far, working on more. You're an author. You're a teacher. You've had an interesting background, it sounds, your life as well. But then you add publishing to the mix.
Right.
How did that come about?
So when my first book was, I was attempting to go the kind of traditional publishing route for The Sum of Our Gods, and that book, by virtue of being religious satire, is niche. It's not going to be at your local Walmart. And so the response that I received from agents was wonderful. They were very encouraging. Agents get a bad rap in this building because they're kind of the people who have to say no all the time. And so a lot of writers are saying, I don't like agents. Well, you're creating an association. They're the ones who said no to you 300 times last year. But they actually are wonderful folks and you want an agent who says no. You want an agent who says no to everyone else, so that when they say yes to you, you know that they are really representing you. And their feedback was really positive. They said, this is a great book. We want you to get this out into the world, but I don't know how I would sell this. This is not going to be sold to one of the big 5 publishing companies. And so they encouraged me to find a small press or to indie publish. And I talked about it with my wife, and she said, this book, I'd written 6 novels before, and that's one of the things I tell my students: don't publish your first book. You're going to get better. It's the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th that you should start sending off to folks. You've practiced, you've honed your craft. And so I'd written 6 novels before, and this was the one where my wife said, this has to get into the world. We can't wait on anybody else anymore. So she was very encouraging, and so we said, okay, we're going to indie publish this, and that was my only expectation, was that we would just be publishing 1 book. But we said, okay, we're going to start a publishing company officially to kind of make it look more official. This was a time when self-publishing was still kind of seen as vanity publishing. We've come a long way from that now. People respect and recognize that self-publishing is entirely legitimate. But at the time, that was, tricky. So we started this company, and we just had one title. I used to joke with folks, we have the smallest publishing company in the world, one title. And then when my second book was coming out, we said, I've learned so much about marketing because of mistakes that I've made. I've made all the mistakes, it feels like sometimes in book marketing. I can help other authors avoid a lot of these errors. So we decided to start this company, and very quickly we were able to sign Heather Ransom, author of Greener, and Going Green was the first one, and then Greener's the sequel that just came out. Jason Brick, Kurt Clopton, who wrote Super Guy, and his sequel, Super Guy 2, Electric Boogaloo. They're superhero spoof comedies. They're very funny. And so we started to grow this company. So we had, 5, 6 titles, and then now we have 17 titles. Is that right? Wow. No, 17 titles, even more authors, because one of them is an anthology. And so we've got this great group of authors. And so it's really grown and grown quickly. And it's been a joy to see that happen. It's also been exhausting. As a teacher and an author and a publisher, I don't sleep much, but it's been wonderful.
So I have to backtrack just a tad on that. Did your wife read the first 6 novels that weren't good enough?
Let's see. I don't think anyone has or ever will read the first 2 or 3. Actually, that's not true. One of them I made my undergraduate senior thesis, so there's some poor professor who had to read one of them. No, I look back on them, and they were they were a high schooler's idea of, kind of a fantasy, and they still exist. Someday I could go back and say, okay, I can see this with an adult's eye, and I can, as somebody who's now studied writing and learned a lot, who knows? But the way that they were, they're certainly not publishable quality. And so I had to learn a lot and do a lot of study and do a lot of hard work to get something that readers would be satisfied with.
So The Sum of Our Gods was the first one you had her read for you?
No, let's see. So she read, there was one called Hell in a Handbasket that was about, this was an interesting one. So Hell in a Handbasket was the idea I was exploring what would happen if a bunch of Old Testament miracles happened in our world. And so I went through the most obscure Old Testament miracles. The most well-known of all the ones I did was Jonah and the whale, but all of the others were, Balaam's ass and Elijah calling down bears to attack some children. And there's some weird stuff that happens in the Old Testament that folks often don't know. And so I told this story and then tried to kind of imagine what would happen if these happened in the modern day. Well, my hypothesis was that the government would essentially say, we need to cover this up. And so we're going to create this sense that this was this other country, and they chose the island of Nauru in the South Pacific, and they blamed them for this, this disaster, and attacked them. Well, in the process, while I was sending it out to be published, that's when 9/11 happened. Ooh. And so if somebody read that post 9/11, it looked like I was saying, oh, 9/11 was this, false flag, 9/11 truther kind of scree. And I just went, nobody can ever read this book. That is not what I believe. That is not what I think. I don't want to create the impression that I am justifying what happened in any way. And so that's a lesson for writers, too. The world continues to move on while we write, and it is out of our control.
So that was maybe almost good enough, but because of the timing.
That was one I was actually sending out and then just stopped. Nope, this one doesn't, and moved on to another project. And to some extent that's happened with Corporate High School as well. I was working on a sequel, and the sequel, a dystopia is supposed to say, this world would be really awful. We should not create this world. This is a cautionary tale. Go in a better direction. And so the sequel to Corporate High School was largely around the idea of torture. Torture is terrible. We, shouldn't, this is not only illegal, but it's something we should not be participating in. And then in the age of Trump, I was like, I am not going to spend my time thinking about a dystopic future. Like, this is, the world is getting worse faster than I can write it. And so I said, I need to turn in a very different direction and tell a story that's, a deeper philosophical story rather than a story that's based on kind of current events and that kind of thing. And so don't read this book as much as it takes place in our world, in the modern world. It is dealing with philosophical issues rather than political issues, which I feel like was all I could bear.
So it's important not only to be passionate about your craft, to hone your craft, to write what you know and love, but it's important to be aware of what's going on around you so that you can understand how your writing might influence or suggest something.
Right. One of the things I really impress upon my students is that it is perfectly fine to write without an eye for what your audience will enjoy, but in that case, you're journaling. As soon as you are thinking this should be published, this is going to get out in the world, you need to be cognizant of who is my reader, what is my reader going to get out of this, and you need to care enough about that person to recognize they are giving you the most precious gift they have, their time. And you owe it to them to give them the best product you can to make that gift that they have given you worthwhile.
And speaking of time, Benjamin, we're out of time, but I really appreciate speaking with you tonight. I'm glad you came. It was
Thank you very much for having me.
Benjamin Gorman, author and publisher. And thank you for watching.